In Gladiator II, one of the most striking characters is a sinister-looking Roman emperor. But his looks aren't just for show. He's actually based on one of the cruelest emperors in Roman history. He murdered his very own brother in front of their mother. And later, this emperor even ordered the brutal massacre of an entire city simply for mocking him. Gladiator II is set in the Roman Empire during the 3rd century AD, the time of the Severan dynasty, and the two emperors portrayed in the film are meant to be Caracalla and his younger brother Geta, and they ruled as co-emperors. Their father came to power through a civil war where he defeated all of his rivals. He came out on top and declared himself emperor. His name was Septimius Severus. He was born in Leptis Magna in Libya. So their father was Libyan and their mother was called Julia Domna, and she also wasn't from Rome. She was from Syria. She came from an aristocratic family and she was supposedly a priestess, very educated and very into the arts. So they had a mixed background of North African and Syrian from their mother's side, which would have given him probably a darker complexion, which we see depicted in his statues with his thick beard and short curly hair. The statues also show him with a strong neck and powerful build, attributes likened to his intense love of long-distance swimming and his soldierly life, as he loved being on campaign with the army. Many people are asking the question, why the lighter complexion in the movie? It doesn't really resemble how he's depicted in statues. Caracalla had a deep obsession with Alexander the Great. Pretty much everything he did in his life was to mimic Alexander the Great. He's even reported to have dressed like him and alter his appearance wearing a wig to look more like Alexander. And I believe the portrayal of him in Gladiator II is a nod to his obsession with Alexander the Great, showing him as he might have wanted to look. The wig with the obvious makeup, a twisted reflection of his hero, Alexander. Caracalla himself was born in Gaul, in a city called Lugdunum, where his father was stationed at the time, in 188. Geta was only 11 months younger than Caracalla. We don't have much information about Caracalla in his early life. Many accounts say that when he was very young, he was amiable, he was very courteous to his parents, as well as the friends of his parents. As he got older, his personality shifted and he took on a more serious and even aggressive stance. The two brothers would have grown up in Rome and they would have had an elite upbringing. They would have had the best education, the best tutors, and pretty much anything they could have wanted, being the sons of the most powerful man in the empire. When Caracalla was just age 9, his father appointed him Augustus, which means he was the co-emperor of the empire alongside his father. This was because his father wanted to create a dynasty that would last for ages. Obviously, he's very young at this point and it's more of a ceremonial thing. And he actually changed his name. Caracalla was born with the name Lucius Septimius Bassianus. But when his father made him co-emperor, he changed his name to Marcus Aurelius Antoninus to associate himself with Marcus Aurelius's family, the previous emperor who was in power, to give them more legitimacy. But everyone knows him as Caracalla. That was a nickname given to him because he habitually wore a hooded cloak, and that type of cloak was called the Caracallus, and it was a cloak from Gaul originally, but many Roman soldiers adopted this cloak. When Caracalla was around 14, his father arranged him to marry the daughter of one of his closest allies, a man called Plautianus, This was a close relative of theirs and someone who supported them when they were coming to power. Plautianus was also given the position of Praetorian prefect, basically in charge of the Praetorian guards, and he was pretty much the second most powerful man in the empire at that time. And Caracalla was set to marry his daughter, Plautilla. But Caracalla and Plautilla did not get along at all. They constantly argued. They couldn't even have dinner together, let alone sleep together. So every time they argued, Plautilla would go back to complain to her dad about Caracalla. This created a lot of tension between the families. It wasn't just between Caracalla and his father-in-law. It was also between Caracalla's mother had issues with the father-in-law. So it was more of a familial issue. And Caracalla made it very clear that when he comes to power, he's going to get rid of Plautianus and his daughter. He made that very clear to them. In the end, some of the historical accounts say that Caracalla ended up forging a letter of some sort to frame Plautianus, frame him for trying to conspire against the emperor. Eventually, Caracalla was able to convince his father that Plautianus was plotting against him, and they had him executed. And they threw his body into the street for everyone to see. And after that, Caracalla exiled his wife and the rest of her family to a small island off the coast of Sicily, where they stayed there for a while, and not long after that, Caracalla had them killed and strangled to death. And this was kind of a sign as to what would happen to you if you cross Caracalla in the wrong way. Caracalla and his brother Gita, they kept living in Rome, but their lives were pretty much revolved around going out, drinking, partying, going to the chariot races. They were very competitive, and there was a lot of tension in their relationship. If Caracalla would bet on the blue chariot team, Gita would by default bet on the green. You know, if Caracalla said go, Gita would say stop. It was that kind of relationship. They were always at odds with each other, but they were living this life of going out, drinking, gambling, partying. Eventually, their father saw the opportunity to take his sons on campaign with him to the faraway land of Britain, where there was some trouble brewing with a small tribe in the northern regions of Britain called the Caledonians, so basically in Scotland. As it was a good opportunity to toughen them up, show them how it was to live life on the road as a soldier, and prepare them to take over for when Septimius Severus dies, as he knew he didn't have much time left. He wasn't in good health. Caracalla would have assumed much of the responsibilities commanding the army in the northern regions of Britannia, but it was also an opportunity for Septimius Severus to relive his old glory days of military campaigns. And it was coming towards the end of his life, and he probably knew that. He was so bored with his mundane life in Rome, it was exciting for him to go on a campaign again. So he took them all the way to Britain with the army. The Caledonian tribes were fighting a guerrilla war. They weren't meeting them head on in battle, which is what the Romans would have wanted. They would just ambush them at night and use guerrilla tactics. And so the war wasn't really progressing. It wasn't really going anywhere. And eventually Septimius Severus, who was sick with gout at the time, he died in Eboracum, which is modern-day York. And once he died, the two brothers paid the Caledonians to just end the war because they needed to go back to Rome to consolidate their power. When Septimius Severus was dying, he gave his two sons advice. He said, be harmonious with each other, enrich the soldiers, and scorn all other men. That was Septimius Severus's philosophy, and his sons kind of followed that. except for the being harmonious with each other part. After their father died, it's said that their relationship became even more tense, and there was even more competition to the brothers. As soon as they got back to Rome, they divided up their palace between themselves. They each had their own entrances into the palace. They began to surround themselves with more and more bodyguards. They would stop eating with each other, stop having dinner with each other, because they became paranoid that one of them would poison the other or try to kill the other. And so they became more and more paranoid. It got so bad that some people even suggested to divide the empire in two, let Geta rule the east from Egypt and Caracalla rule the west from Rome. But their mother really was against this idea, and this led us to, in my opinion, one of the darker things that Caracalla did in his life. Their mother didn't like the tension between her two sons, and so she arranged to have a peace meeting between them at her home, where they would come unarmed without their bodyguards. And so after Geta and Caracalla arrived there to make a peace deal, Caracalla had his bodyguards burst in the room and murder Geta in front of their mother, stabbing him to death as she's trying to hold them back. It was a tragic scene, especially for their mother. You have to be a truly despicable person, not only to murder your brother, but to do it in front of your mother's eyes, so she has to witness it and live with that trauma for the rest of her life. Not only that, it was also done during what was meant to be a peace meeting. It's really difficult to stoop to lower levels than what Caracalla was willing to do. He was willing to do anything and everything to secure his position in power. And as soon as Geta was murdered, Caracalla quickly went to the army and told them that it was actually his brother Geta who had tried to murder him but died in the process. And immediately after that, Caracalla went on a purge. He went throughout the city, rounding up anyone who was friends with his brother Geta, anyone who was a supporter of his, an advisor, a friend, anyone who spent time with him, and massacred them all. It's said that he killed up to around 20,000 people, servants, teachers, even the chariot racers that Geta, supported. Nobody was safe. Not only that, he also went even further. Caracalla ordered something called a damnatio memoriae. And in ancient Rome, this meant erasing the memory of someone. So he erased the memory of his brother from all the statues, all the inscriptions where he's mentioned. He even made it illegal to say his name in public. And you can even see one depiction of the Severan family when Caracalla and Geta are just young boys. And you can see where Geta's face has been scratched out, and they did an analysis on the scratched out part, and they found it was scratched out with human excrement. And the army wasn't too sure what to think about this, because they swore allegiance to protect both of the sons of Severus. Caracalla managed to gain their loyalty by taking his father's advice, enriching the soldiers. He paid them even more than they were paid before, bribed them, raised their pay. This made the army happy, but it put the empire in a very difficult financial position, which leads us to one of the major things that Caracalla did in his life. It was the Constitutio Antoniniana, or the Antonine Constitution, named after his birth name of Antoninus. This decree gave Roman citizenship to nearly every free man within the Roman Empire. This is something that had never been done before. Prior to this, all of the Roman citizens were mainly in Italy, and it was very difficult to actually gain Roman citizenship. And many of the sources say Caracalla did this to increase his tax base, earn more money to pay the army. And not only that, only a Roman citizen could serve in the army. So not only that, he also increased the number of recruits he could draw from to build his army, as he had big plans to invade one of the biggest empires on Rome's doorstep, the Parthians. Roughly a year after the death of Geta, Caracalla would leave Rome, never to return. His first stop was in Germania in the north, where there had been some trouble with the Germanic tribes on the Roman border. It was a dispute between the Alemanni and the Chatti tribes. The Alemanni requested help from the Romans to defeat a neighboring tribe who were invading, and Caracalla went to support them. But when he arrived, instead of helping the Alemanni, he betrayed them, massacred all of their military-age men, and occupied their territory, and then fought a war against the other tribe, the Chatti. So he just straight up betrayed his former allies who requested his support, and then occupied their territory. That was his first stop. This betrayal created even more of a distrust between the Germanic tribes and the Romans than ever existed before, all because of Caracalla. After that, he went on a tour throughout his empire. He went through the Balkans, down through Anatolia, stopping off at all of the major cities like Nicomedia, Antioch in Syria, and he traveled all the way down, again following Alexander the Great's route to Persia. Of course, he had to stop in Egypt, and there was no other city as important, as famous, as wealthy and influential as Alexandria, which was exactly where he went. He was expected to be greeted as a glorious, triumphant emperor, just like his hero Alexander. But when he arrived in the city, the Alexandrians, who are known for being a little bit cheeky and like to make fun of their rulers, they got word of the situation with Geta, how Caracalla probably murdered his brother, and also how Caracalla depicted himself almost like a god. And they were kind of poking fun of it with a satire and with some graffiti, with some jokes written. This sent Caracalla into a furious rage. He set his army upon the city, massacred the entire population, killed all of the military-age men, and allowed his army to burn and loot Alexandria for 3 days straight, all simply for mocking him. And ironically, the city that's most associated with Alexander the Great, his hero, he ended up looting, burning, and murdering the population, which is kind of ironic. From there, he went back to Antioch to plan his invasion of Parthia, as again, he was obsessed with following in Alexander's footsteps, so his dream was to conquer the Persians, just like Alexander did. His first move in Parthia wasn't to invade, but to arrange a marriage between himself, as he had killed his last wife, he needed a new wife, and a Parthian princess from one of the kings there. And this king accepted the proposal. They had arranged a wedding and invited Caracalla. They were looking forward to it, to a new future of peace between Rome and Parthia. And this huge wedding was planned. The wife, the bride, was there waiting for Caracalla. As Caracalla arrived with his men, he immediately ordered them to begin butchering everyone and murdering everyone without any warning. And the Parthian king managed to escape. And this betrayal made the Parthians despise the Romans like never before, and probably led to the future centuries of war, of ongoing wars between Rome and Parthia. And Caracalla from there had allowed his men to go throughout the region in Mesopotamia, looting and burning all of the neighboring villages. That was how he began his invasion of Parthia. And while he was in that region, still marching with his men, he wanted to stop at a nearby temple to pray, because Caracalla was obsessed with making sure the gods were on his side, the gods were protecting him. Obviously, because of all of the people he had wronged, he was extremely paranoid. And so they stop at this temple. Caracalla needs to go to the bathroom. He stops at the side of the road. And one of his soldiers, one of his very own soldiers who he had wronged in the past, some say it was for rejecting his promotion. Others say it was because Caracalla was responsible for the execution of this soldier's brother. Either way, this soldier had a vendetta against Caracalla, and while he was relieving himself on the side of the road, this soldier attacked Caracalla and stabbed him to death in the same brutal fashion that Caracalla's brother Gita was murdered. And that was the end of Caracalla. And the interesting thing is, it's said that the man behind his murder was his very own Praetorian prefect, Macrinus. And I have a video all about Macrinus. You can click on that over here.